the budget shall be prescribed by law. I've highlighted the portion that says the form, content, and manner of preparation shall be prescribed by law. The law here refers to the Administrative Code of 1987, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Specifically, Book 6, Chapter 3, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm bringing up Section 11, the relevant portions of the Admin Code, Book 6, Chapter 3. It provides for the submission by the President of the proposed budget. This is the form, content, and manner referred to in the constitutional provision, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it mentions national government budget, estimated receipts, budget proposal, programs, projects, and activities, budget message, summary of financial statements, and what are required to be set forth. So if you look at Section 12.2A and 12.2B, requiring the estimated expenditures and estimated receipts for the ensuing fiscal year, that refers to the BESF, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Section 12.2A also states, and I quote, the proposed appropriations necessary for the support of the government for the ensuing fiscal year. This refers to the PAPs expressed or appearing in the NEP, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, if we are to go back to the Constitution, these are actually echoed in relevant portions or provisions on the submission of the budget. For example, Article 7, Section 22. It requires the President to submit, and I quote, a budget of expenditures and sources of financing, close quote, within 30 days. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Meanwhile, Article 6, Section 25, which prohibits Congress from increasing the proposed budget, explicitly refers to, again I quote, the appropriations recommended by the President for the operation of the government. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And when the Constitution says appropriations recommended by the President, that is in the NEP. Correct?
Okay, Your Honor, I'm trying to recall. So the NEP, the NEP includes both the programmed appropriations and the unprogrammed appropriations.
Correct.
So it is our humble submission.
Yes, but
Your Honor.
those are the appropriations recommended by the President because the NEP originates from the office of the President.
Yes, yes, correct.
Yes, I'm going to go to where you're going. Don't worry. So now that we're on the same page, let's look together at the budget documents submitted by the President for fiscal year 2024, 2025, and 2026. Can you bring up Section 1 of the general provisions in the 2024 NEP? It is there stated that, and I quote, the amount of 4.3 million is hereby appropriated out of any funds of the National Treasury not otherwise appropriated for the operation of the government. That's Section 1. This amount of 4.3 trillion refers to the new general appropriations for fiscal year 2024, which is the sum of 4.019 billion for programmed and 281.9 billion for unprogrammed, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. That's in the slide. You can see that the slide which appears in the submission shows both programmed and unprogrammed.
Correct, Your Honor.
Let's go to the 2025 NEP. And it states, and I quote, the proposed total new general appropriations requiring legislative authorization will amount to 4,405 billion, composed of 4,247 billion in programmed appropriations and 158.67 billion in unprogrammed appropriations, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Again, that is reflected in that table being flashed on the screen. Finally, in the introduction to the 2026 NEP, it also states, if I can have that flashed, the total proposed level for new general appropriations which requires legislative authorization comprised of programmed and unprogrammed appropriations amounts to 4.652.8 billion. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. So based on the foregoing, it appears to me, at least, no? It appears clear to me when the President requests legislative authority, he is requesting spending authority in the amounts for both programmed and unprogrammed. Do we agree?
I agree, Your Honor.
Okay. And when Congress acts on the proposed budget submitted by the President, it in fact evaluates both programmed and unprogrammed appropriations, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Because unprogrammed appropriations, by its nature, constitutes, in your words, a standby authority.
Correct, Your Honor.
In fact, in your statements in the last oral arguments, you describe the PAPs in the unprogrammed appropriations as, and I quote you, the government's aspirational priorities, programs which are also needed and ready for implementation, but whose funding depends on specific fiscal events that may or may not occur. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. So when Congress authorizes the amounts allocated for unprogrammed appropriations, the result is the same. The executive can implement the PAPs and for that purpose spend public funds, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
I'm showing to you Section 23, Chapter 4, Book 6 of the Admin Code. It also says that the GAA must show the appropriations for each PAP, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
So to be clear, the BESF provides for the expenses and sources of funding, but it is the NEP that indicates the PAPs that should be funded for the next fiscal year. Agree?
I agree, Your Honor.
All right. So the NEP is essentially the expression of the President's priority programs and policies, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Therefore, given all of these, to my mind, at least to my mind, there is no other conclusion other than the fact that when the Constitution prohibits Congress from increasing the appropriations recommended by the President, that prohibition includes all the appropriations in the NEP. Do you agree?
We respectfully disagree, Your Honor.
I'm going to go to that one. You're talking about the deficit, the budget deficit?
We went, Your Honor, we went, in order to interpret the constitutional provision, we look at the deliberations and also the history of the constitutional provision on what is being referred to in the President's proposed appropriations for the operations of government. And it is our submission that it refers to the BESF, which includes the programmed appropriations.
There are no programmed appropriations in the BSF. They're just sources of funding. It's really the NEP.
The BESF and the TEP both contain the programmed appropriations and the automatic appropriations. So they are, they detail the expenses and the sources of financing. So that's why it's called the BESF. Okay.
We will agree to disagree. I'm showing you a table comparing the appropriations in the 2024, 2025, and 2026 NEP and GAA. Looking at this, can you confirm, Counsel, that Congress retained the total programmed appropriations recommended by the President in 2024 and 2026, but reduced the programmed appropriations in 2025?
I don't have the details, but based on this one, Your Honor, I will agree.
Okay. So looking at the same table, in 2024, Congress increased the total unprogrammed appropriations almost threefold, or by 449.5 billion. And in 2025, the increase was 204.75 billion. And based on this same table, this resulted in Congress increasing the total total appropriations recommended by the President in 2024 and 2025. Can we agree on that?
Correct, Your Honor.
Can you put on the screen again Article 6, Section 25(1)? May not increase the appropriations recommended by the President. This prohibition, at least textually, Madam Solicitor General, this is clear. Textually.
Your Honor, it is our humble position that this provision has to be interpreted with Article 6, Section 25, Paragraph 1. The provision that says as to what the President has to propose to the Congress, which is the proposed appropriations based on the operations, for the operations of government.
That's the NEP.
That is the BESF.
And the NEP.
The NEP.
The BESF doesn't have the appropriations, right?
Your Honor, the NEP consists of the programmed and the unprogrammed appropriation. It is our position that we are referring to the BESF, which does not contain the unprogrammed appropriation.
No,
because
the BSF contains expenses and sources of financing.
that is correct.
Based on the
Your
expenses and the sources of financing, the President, through the executive, through the President, now says, I want to use that money to fund these particular projects.
Yes, Your Honor.
And you find that in the NEP.
Yes, Your Honor, but the unprogrammed appropriations are
I'm not talking about
found.
unprogrammed. I'm talking only about the NEP being the expression of where I will use the money to fund which PAPs.
Yes, Your Honor.
Correct?
Correct,
So when
Your
you
Honor.
talk about budget, you just don't talk about sources of funding.
Yes,
You talk about saan mo ilalaan yung pera.
yes, Your Honor, the expenditures.
And that's the NEP.
Yes, the NEP includes both, but when I
No, the
mentioned
budget includes BSF and the NEP.
the budget for us, Your Honor,
No, that's why I started everything, Solicitor General, by posting to you all the provisions of the Constitution that referred to budget.
yes. May I clarify, Your Honor? And when I mentioned a while ago that we looked at the deliberations of the CONCOM for the Constitution, it is our interpretation that the rationale for the requirement of sealing is so that there will be no unbounded expenditures that will result in too much deficit. And that's
Yes.
why when the President proposes for expenditures and the sources of financing, it is our considered position and the interpretation also of Congress for so many years since 1987 Constitution, and that I think was the point of the amicus curiae, that it has been interpreted by Congress, which is also a reasonable interpretation. There is no prohibition as to unprogrammed appropriations. The unprogrammed appropriations are sourced from different sources of financing, and which former Congressman Joey Salceda mentioned that it is self-funding. And that's why, to us, to the respondents, generally speaking, the unprogrammed appropriations will not result in a deficit because they are sourced from different sources of funding.
Understood. I think the words of Congressman Salceda is that unprogrammed funds are deficit neutral, correct?
Deficit neutral, correct.
And I'll go there later. In the meantime, you were asked by Justice Leonen whether there is anything in the Constitution that says any excess revenue should be first applied to PAPs in the programmed appropriations and not to the unprogrammed appropriations. I think that's a transcript of the oral arguments. And your response is, it is only in the GAA, Your Honor. I'd like to clarify, what do you mean by that? It is only in the GAA?
I was referring to the condition or the triggers which are specified in the special provision of the GAA.
Okay. So, to be clear, your position is that the constitutional prohibition on increasing the President's proposed budget exists primarily to prevent a budget deficit. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
Your Honor, that was the rationale that
Yeah.
we interpreted from the exchange of Commissioner Davide and Mr. Natividad.
Okay, so that everybody again is on the same page, can you pull up the language for the triggers in 2024, 2025, and 2026? In all of these GAAs, Section 1, it says any of the following exists: excess revenue collections in any one of the identified non-tax revenues from its corresponding revenue collection target. Same with 2025 and 2026. This is what you are referring to as the basis of your interpretation of what the Constitution prohibits, correct?
This is statutory,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Yes. So this is your basis.
Yes, Your Honor. Although, may I clarify, and my team can also help me confirm, because my recollection is in the 2024 GAA, the wording is accurate, but in the 2025 and 2026, okay, tama po pala. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
That's okay. So under the first condition, excess collections in any one of the identified non-tax revenue sources can trigger the authority to spend the unprogrammed appropriations, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And new revenue collections from sources not reflected in the BSF can also trigger the unprogrammed appropriations under the second condition, correct?
Your Honor, may I qualify? The sources that are referred to in the special provision are also anchored on the targets that are enumerated in the BESF because they are excess in the target revenue collection.
I have an example that will show that, if you don't mind. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
But you agree that as soon as either condition arises, the spending authority for the unprogrammed appropriations is triggered.
It is triggered, Your Honor, depending on the requirements of the certification from the Bureau of Treasury and the DBM issuance of the SARO.
Yes, okay. So at that point in time, when these triggers are triggered, the agencies with PAPs in the unprogrammed appropriations may apply for its release. Correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And they can apply for their release even if the revenue target for the year for programmed appropriations have not been met. Correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay, let's have a more concrete example. Based on the 2026 BSF, the projected revenue from the non-tax revenue programs of the following agencies are the following. So you have 3.8 for DOTR, 961 million for DOF, and another 815 for registration fees of the DOTR. These projected revenues fund the PAPs in the programmed appropriations, correct?
I will trust, Your Honor.
It's in the BSF.
Yes, but I don't have the detail, but I trust Your Honor, your slide.
Okay. So let's say that as of the end of the third quarter of 2026, DOTR, DOF, and DOT are able to collect the following amounts. Can you look at the next slide? DOTR is able to collect 2 billion, DOF, BOC is able to collect 2 billion, DOT is able to collect 500 million. That's a total collected amount of 4.5 billion. Agree?
Yes, Your Honor.
Considering that 4.5 billion is less than the 5.6 billion projected revenue for Q3, you do not have a surplus at the end of the third quarter, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's expand the example. Let's also say that there is a programmed appropriation for a PAP worth 5 billion and an unprogrammed appropriation for another PAP worth 1 billion under unprogrammed. Question: do we have enough to fund the PAP under the programmed appropriation worth 5 billion? We
Your
don't.
Honor, if it is in the
Program.
BESF, if it is in the program, then there is a corresponding source of financing.
No, I'm giving you the example already. That's how much money they made as of the third quarter. And the total is only 4.5 billion. But the
Okay.
projected revenues for the third quarter is 5.6 billion.
I submit, Your Honor.
Okay. So, assuming that there is a PAP under the programmed appropriation worth 5 billion, and there is a PAP under the unprogrammed part worth 1 billion, my question first is, do you have enough to fund the PAP under the program?
No, Your Honor.
You're missing 500 million,
Yes, Your Honor.
which the government can perhaps earn in the last quarter. Quarter 4.
Could be, Your Honor.
Could be. Now, going back to my earlier slide, which shows, again, this is only an example, that the Bureau of Customs has already exceeded its projected revenue from import processing fees by about 1 billion. This would mean also that Special Provision 1A of the unprogrammed appropriations is triggered, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
In other words, the 1 billion may now be used to fund the PAP in the unprogrammed appropriation worth 1 billion, correct?
Well, actually, Your Honor, our interpretation or our submission is that if it is an excess of what has been accepted by Congress as the target, then it is a source of funding for the unprogrammed and not for the programmed.
Even if the BSF indicates that the earnings, that was a source of revenue for program.
Yes, Your Honor. That's what I was trying to explain a while ago with regard to the intuitive idea that the unprogrammed appropriations will only be funded if there is a surplus. But surplus, the DBM briefs us, has a technical meaning or even ordinary meaning, is that surplus is revenue minus disbursement. But it is not the source of funding. There should not be a surplus in order to fund an unprogrammed appropriation, but an excess in the...
I'm not understanding what you're saying, because what I showed you was the BSF. Those were the sources of funding for the programmed.
Yes,
And
yes,
one
Your
of those
Honor.
items, we get to collect much, much more.
Yes, Your Honor.
That now can be used for program.
Your
It's
Honor,
it's only a source of funding.
yes, it's a source of funding, but attached to it is the target revenue, which the government commits to meet.
Exactly.
And that is
And by the third quarter, it has exceeded that target.
Your Honor, may I mention that in the execution and administration of the fund, which is part of the budget execution, so the DBM is observing certain policies on cash programming in such a way. I think that this issue was also raised in Aralio, where at first the conclusion was, in order to determine if there is an excess that could be a source of unprogrammed appropriation, the DBM has to wait for the whole year.
No, hold on, hold on. I'm just talking about program. I have BSF telling me that licenses of the BOC is a source of funding for program. And in the third quarter, I realize I've far exceeded that amount. Common sense tells me that amount, which is a source of funding, which I identified in the BSF, can now be used for program activities.
I agree.
Are we saying that we cannot use it for program?
I agree, Your Honor. It is very intuitive. My interpretation, my submission is that the DBM works on a periodic checking if there is an excess. So there is also a periodic target that they have to meet.
Wait, I'm giving you quarter 3 figures. That's a quarterly figure of collections versus projections. And I've collected much, much more. What else will DBM look at?
Okay.
That's an excess in my projected revenues.
My understanding, Your Honor, is that every quarter they have to work.
That's why we're in the third quarter.
Yes, Your Honor. So you work on targets, and that's how the DBM will coordinate with the BTR if there is an excess in any one of the collection.
Can you bring up again the screen, the example? There. Projected revenues is 961. Isn't that the target?
Your Honor, if I may ask for the supporting explanation of the DBM, because that was also what we asked as to how they monitor the targets, because in the motion for reconsideration of Aralio, the Supreme Court also said that you don't have to wait for the whole year.
I disagree with your reading of Aralio. I'll flash it later on the screen. That is not how I read Aralio. But I do want to hear from DBM what explanation they have. Given my example, that's my target revenue. That's my projected revenue. I breached it. It's now 2 billion. Are you telling me that I cannot use the excess of 2 billion over 961 for programmed activities?
The actual revenues...
That's my example, huh?
Okay. It depends. For me, Your Honor, it depends on what was the target revenue.
That's the target. That's the projected revenue. Yan ang tinitignan ng gobyerno to fund program.
Your Honor, may
Yes.
I ask for the DBM representative,
Because I'd like to
please?
understand.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. If I may take a step back and clarify one point on the slide. It said there that there's 5 billion appropriation, but
In the
there's
program.
in the program, yes, sir.
Assume lang yan, ha?
Opo, and there's only 4.5
billion collected.
but
Actual collections as of
Yes.
Q3.
for a specific program which
For
will
all three sources of funding.
Yes, Your
Okay.
Honor. So when we were proposing the budget, when we submit the BASF, the programmed appropriations have the necessary counterpart sources of financing in totality. So it's not really, except for special funds, which would have to be spent for a specific purpose. It would have considered that cash is fungible.
Hold on. But when you put it in the BSF as a source of funding, you're looking at it as a source of funding.
Yes, Your Honor.
To fund what? Program.
Yes, Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, po.
And my example is very simple. I collect more than what I projected. Why can I not use that money for program?
When we are during the budget execution phase of the cycle, the DBM is implementing the General Appropriations Act. So at that point, considering that no money shall be paid out of the Treasury without an appropriation made by law, the only options left to the DBM for spending the excess revenue would be either to spend it for unprogrammed appropriations as provided by the GAA, or another option would be not to spend it for the unprogrammed appropriations.
No, but
because
I go
it's
back to the question of Justice Marvick. Why not spend it for program? It's just money.
If we're referring to cash, Your Honor, the cash could be spent for program, but
So-
the excess revenue...
No, in my example is very specific. My collections is 2 billion. Your projected revenues was 900. So there's a increase of 1.1 billion. Can I use that for program?
The cash from the collections?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. But can I use it also for unprogrammed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Also,
Yes.
correct? Because it is also triggered. It's excess
Yes,
revenue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Tama?
Yeah, may I clarify, Your Honor, that
Okay.
when you use it for the program, I qualified my answer that you can use the cash, considering the fungibility of the cash. But the notation or the ledger noting the excess revenue will still be available for appropriation towards the unprogrammed appropriation.
Wow, nawala ako dun.
Let me be clearer, Your Honor, if I may. So when we have collections, of course, there's the cash. And there's also the trigger for the unprogrammed appropriations. The cash, our position has always been, it is fungible. So if there is cash and it's like you have, if it's like depositing in a bank. You're not depositing in a safety deposit box, but you're depositing. So the cash itself is fungible, so you can spend it. But as to the trigger, whether you've already triggered the unprogrammed appropriation trigger to allow for releases, then yes, as soon as you have excess revenue beyond what is the target for the BES.
So I go back to my example. Is there an excess revenue beyond the target?
Yes.
So I can use it for unprogrammed.
Yes po.
But I can also use it for program if it were cash.
The cash po, yes.
The cash equivalent. Tama ba?
The cash is, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So who chooses where to go? Who chooses that I use it for unprogrammed and not programmed?
At the point that there is a trigger and there's a corresponding request from the agencies which fall under the purposes identified under the unprogrammed appropriations, then there's no need to prioritize one or the other. Both can be released. But of course, the sources of financing.
No, it can be both. It's just 1 peso. Diba? 1 peso lang yung pwede mong ibigay, ilaan.
Yeah,
Sinong pumipili kung saan mo ilalagay yon? Sa unprogrammed or programmed? Na-trigger ng unprogrammed. Pwede nang ilagay. So, kung pwede natin gamitin yon for unprogrammed, yes. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Kung pwede natin gamitin yon for program, the answer is also yes.
Yes.
Correct? So, sino nagde-decide? Yung pisong yon?
May I clarify,
Sige
Your
po.
Honor? When we propose the budget, there's an expenditure and a source of financing. And while we may not have all the cash for the sources of financing, and this is composed of both revenues and borrowings, these revenues and borrowings are already programmed and planned. So if we have committed to provide sources of financing for the programmed appropriations, that means that the national government is ready and willing to provide the corresponding source of financing for
Okay. So, in other words, you got to trigger the unprogrammed and it gets spent for unprogrammed. Because at the end of the day, for programmed appropriations, government is ready to fulfill that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Kasi hindi nga safety deposit box, parang bangko.
Yes, Your
diba?
Honor.
But we now have an Iran war. And the Iran war has screwed up my income revenue stream, projected. So I know that in Q4, I won't be able to fund my 5 billion project. Kasi nakuha na ng unprogrammed yung 1 billion eh. So, I need 1.5. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And government, as you just said, will make sure that program is implemented. This priority plan of the president.
Yes, Your Honor.
It will borrow.
Yes, Your Honor.
Therefore, it has an effect on the deficit. Yes?
Yes.
It has. And therefore, if you increase the unprogrammed and spend it, forcing you to borrow for programmed activities and projects, you are increasing the deficit.
If you're borrowing for the program, that should still be within the target deficit for the fiscal year.
No, my situation again is they are triggered both ways. You're putting it now to unprogrammed, and you can, per the language, because it's in the language.
Opo.
Pero nawalan ako ng 1.5 billion to finish my 5 billion sa program. Hihiram ako ng 1.5.
If I may clarify, Your Honor, what I spent for the unprogrammed was not considered in the BESF as a source of financing for the program.
But it was financing because of over-collections.
Yes, Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it could actually finance or fund my PAP in the program.
It could have resulted in a lower deficit if we used the excess collection.
Yes.
But it would not using it for UA would not necessarily increase the deficit.
Correct. Except that I have the
programmed by
Iran war and I have to borrow money to finish my 5 billion project. In that situation, the budget deficit is affected, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Adversely.
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is not accurate to say that unprogrammed appropriations are deficit neutral. Under the language of your special provisions. Because your special provisions allow to fund unprogrammed appropriations for any increase in any item, as opposed to the total.
Yes,
If it
Your
were the
Honor.
total, I'll agree with you, it is neutral. But the way it is couched, the language, which allows me to use in any item an excess to fund UA, that makes it not neutral, right?
If I may clarify, Your Honor, looking at unprogrammed appropriations in isolation, it is deficit neutral.
Yes.
But-
But once triggered,
If we relate the possibility of using the excess revenue to fund programmed appropriations instead of borrowing, then that's the time.
it will lessen the budget, the deficit. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is the moment the trigger is triggered, it goes to UA. Then bahala na si Batman sa program.
In accordance with the GAA provisions as enacted by Congress, Your Honor.
So I guess that's where I'm coming from. I don't think it's accurate to say that unprogrammed appropriations are deficit neutral. In a situation where you have provisions in your GAA that allow you to take from any source, that has an effect on the deficit. Are we in agreement with that? You see, my problem, I'll be very candid with you. My problem is not unprogrammed appropriations as a concept. I totally agree with Congressman Salceda. And I also agree with Secretary Jokno. We need that, especially for foreign-assisted projects, right? So my problem really is the triggers. Why are the triggers that way? They're creating artificial surpluses. So, again, my line of questioning is only to clarify, totoo nga bang walang epekto ang program? Parang hindi. Once matrigger. You're smiling, so I think you're saying yes?
Your Honor, if there's a basic concept on the executive end that when we proposed the budget, considering we're in a deficit budget, when we propose the budget, the BESF already anticipates a certain level of borrowing and a certain level of deficit. So that's an accepted programmed amount in the BESF.
Correct. But if that happens and I earn more, why can't I use it for program? There's no law that says I cannot use it for program, right?
There's no law, Your Honor.
It will, in fact, decrease the deficit, correct?
It could, Your Honor.
But that's not what's happening. What's happening is the moment any of those triggers are triggered, UA.
In accordance with the special provisions, Your Honor.
Yes. So therefore, I'm not wrong in saying that there seems to be a choice already that once one of those triggers get triggered, it goes to UA. And if I cannot fund my programmed appropriation, I have no choice but to borrow. And it will increase the deficit. I think that is what Chairman Solita Monsod was mentioning. It is increasing the budget deficit.
We have no choice but to borrow. But if it's in line with the programmed amount in the BSF, then it will be within the acceptable deficit programmed by the executive.
Okay. Thank you.
Respectfully, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. I'll go to a different point. I think, thank you. This was mentioned also by the Solicitor General. In Aralio versus Aquino, again, per my reading, the court ruled that unprogrammed funds should consider the revenue targets as a whole, not individually. That was in Aralio decision. Okay. In the last oral arguments, you argued that the ruling was limited only to the 2011, 2012, and 2013 GAAs. Did I understand your argument correctly? Okay. So can we pull up the 2011, 2012, and 2013 GAAs? If you look at the language, of 2011, 2012, and 2013, they're talking totals only when the revenue collections exceed the original revenue targets, provided that collections arising from sources not considered may be used to cover releases from appropriations. This seems to be a more expansive language compared to the 2024, 2025, and 2026 GAAs, which specify any. Are we in agreement with that?
Yes, Your Honor. Beginning 2015,
Yes.
there was a change in the special provision on the trigger that there was an inclusion of the phrase in
Yes.
anyone.
Okay. But in the 2014 Aralio decision, government already was arguing that the way to read those provisions, which I flashed on the screen, is that excess in the revenue collection for a particular source. So given even the language of 2011, 2012, and 2013, the argument of government was, no, the correct way to understand that is collection for a particular source. I'm showing to you, can you bring up slide 32? There, I highlighted. That's a quote from Aralio versus Aquino. But the respondents understand the phrase to refer only to the collections for each source of revenue as enumerated in the BSF.
Yes, Your Honor. And that's why in the briefing to us, I think that was the reaction because of the interpretation of the Supreme Court in Aralio. In 2015, the trigger provision was revised.
But
to
the trigger,
include
but the
in
trigger
anyone.
provision here talks about totals, and you revised it to make it more clear that it can be taken from specific.
In anyone, because
Yes, but the Supreme Court in Aralio ruled against that.
okay. Your Honor, may I clarify? I want to make a distinction between what was being interpreted by the Supreme Court in the Aralio, and that's why I try to draw the attention of the people that now the special provision trigger has a different articulation, and I would say in reaction to the interpretation of the court, and that's why they added the...
But that doesn't make sense to me. The language of 2011, 2012, and 2013 were clear. It's total.
May I clarify?
And then the respondents, government said, no, that's not how to read it, Supreme Court. You read it per source. And the Supreme Court said, no, it cannot be per source because you're going to screw up the budget because you're going to create artificial surpluses. And the reaction is to actually say that's a reaction that sidesteps. That's a reaction that's has already been debunked by the Supreme Court in this case. So I don't understand.
Your Honor, so we were also looking at the origin. Where was the artificial surplus mentioned? And I think it's coming from this case. And the reason why, to us, there is a big impact as to what we are now considering, we have to remember that this special provision is not a constitutional it's not a constitutional requirement. It is a statutory requirement that was being interpreted by the Supreme Court in Aralio. So here, it seems that the trigger is an excess in the total, and that's why the court interpreted it as, then you have to wait for the total revenue projection.
That's not what Aralio said. That's not what Aralio... You're talking about the motion for recon?
Which was eventually what was decided on by the Supreme Court in the motion for reconsideration.
Okay. Can we bring up the pertinent portion of the Supreme Court decision on Aralio motion for recon? It's slide 35. That's the language. Based on the 2011, 2012, and 2013 GAAs, respondents contend that each source of revenue in the budget proposal must exceed. Accordingly, the court's ruling thereon nullified the intention of the authors. That was the argument of the respondents, the Solicitor General at the time. The ruling of the court says the respondents' contentions are without merit. Look at the next paragraph, which I highlighted. While we maintain the position that aggregate revenue collection must first exceed aggregate revenue target as a prerequisite to the use of unprogrammed funds, we clarify. So in other words, what the Supreme Court was clarifying was in the middle of the year, you can determine that already, whether total exceeds total. It was not a statement of the Supreme Court to say that we go back to interpreting specific sources. That's why I decided to put it on screen. It's clear as day, as for me.
Your Honor, may I say the position of the respondents. So to us, the argument of the Solicitor General then was reflecting what was the interpretation also of the Executive and Congress. And since the wording it seems to refer only to the total, and that's why we accept wholeheartedly the interpretation of the Supreme Court in taking into consideration the total revenue and then determining if there is an excess. And that's why that is what I'm trying to explain, that impelled Congress to insert another phrase that in any one of the collection target, you can ascertain which has an excess, and you don't have to wait for the
But
total.
Counsel, the change in that language is precisely what the Supreme Court said you ought not to do, because it will create an artificial surplus. My takeaway from Aralio, and I guess I invite everybody here to read it, is number one, that the language of 2011, 2012, and 2013, as clear as it was, could not be interpreted the way the respondents were arguing. It had to be total. And number two, that if you were to interpret it as a specific source, any source, then you are creating a distortion. You're creating an artificial surplus. You are now impacting on the budget deficit. That's my takeaway from both the decision and the resolution. And it boggles my mind that you tell me that the reaction of Congress to a clear decision of the Supreme Court is to say the very thing that the Supreme Court said could not be done.
Your Honor.
That boggles the mind.
Yes, Your Honor, I perfectly understand where you are coming from. I am trying to explain the position of the respondents because the UAs were never intended to be funded by surpluses. They are the intention is to fund it with the excess in the target revenues, in the revenues that have been promised by the President to be met by government.
And then the Iran war happened, and I can't get that funding anymore.
Your Honor.
And yet, the excess I will use for UA, not PA.
Your Honor.
That's what I don't understand.
If I may, so there is also a contingent fund in the programmed appropriations.
No, but that's not what happened, right? What happened is na-prefer ang UA. For lack of a better word, no? Inuna ang UA.
Your Honor, the position of the respondents is that since they are sourced from different sources.
But they're not. My example says that they're not.
Okay. They refer to the same source, but the target that was submitted by the President and accepted by Congress as the source of financing is then also a definite. So if the target revenue is 1 billion and the government yields 1.2 billion, the 0.2 billion will then be a trigger for the unprogrammed appropriations. That is the humble submission of the respondents, Your Honor.
Again, let's agree to disagree. The decisions of the Supreme Court become part of the law of the land, right?
Correct, Your Honor.
And if my reading of the decision in Aralio is correct, then the only conclusion I have is that the language beginning 2014, 2015, they were in contravention of the Aralio ruling.
Again, it is my respectful submission, Your Honor, that we think that there is an impact to changing the word so that including the in any. The in any interpretation, the Supreme Court said that it is inappropriate if the wording of the trigger in the 2011 to 2013 is this way, because we were referring to the total. But if it is in any...
That seems to be such a very narrow reading of Aralio. Aralio was very specific to say that it should be totals because you do not want to create an artificial surplus. And that statement was in relation to the desire of government not to increase its deficit budget. So when you start saying that this is the language, but it could not have meant this, it could only mean this, and then you totally prescind from the effects on the budget, that seems to be such a selective way of reading things.
Your Honor, the position of the respondents is that what has been submitted by the President in the BESF when accepted by the Congress will be the level of the target revenues that are committed by government. And that's why if there is an excess, then that could be the source of funding for the standby appropriation. That is the position of the government.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I only have a few questions left. Actually, I have 1,000 questions. I'll ask them the next time. But for today, I just have a few more questions. Can I ask the DBM representative? These are just points of clarification I want to make.
We have the two representatives.
The one who was here.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor.
Can you put on the slide section 5 of DBM Circular 581? Are you familiar with this, ma'am?
I can read through it, Your Honor.
Clarificatory guidelines and procedures applicable to foreign-assisted projects following the cash budgeting system and Treasury single account framework. That's the title. I'm assuming you're familiar with it?
Fairly, Your Honor.
Fairly or very?
Fairly, Your Honor.
Fairly, okay. It has 5.1 and 5.2. These are just points to clarify. My understanding of 5.1 is that it refers to new FAPs that are ready for implementation as of the cutoff date indicated in the budget call. Is my understanding correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And since they are ready for implementation, it means that as of the date indicated in the budget call, they have already undergone the rigorous evaluation process mentioned by Secretary Jokno last time, namely pre-feasibility study, feasibility study, detailed engineering, review of the internal rate of return threshold, and a certain source of financing for these new FAPs.
Yes, Your Honor.
That's correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So our spending authority for this type of FAP is no longer contingent on anything.
No, Your Honor.
All right. So as an example, can you put lang on the slide? This is the example I find. That's the Metro Manila Subway Project Phase 1, which is part of the appropriations for the Department of Transportation under the 2026 GAA. This is under programmed appropriations, correct?
I have to verify that, Your Honor.
I'm telling you already.
Okay.
Okay.
Your
It's in program. So here you have a source of funding. The loan has been approved. Nothing else needs to be done. Therefore, nasa program siya.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, going back to Budget Circular 581, Section 5.2, they refer to FAPs that, while already approved or scheduled to be approved by the ICC and NEDA, they are not yet implementation ready as of the cutoff date indicated in the budget call. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, Your Honor.
And these programs, they will be evaluated by the DBM for inclusion in the unprogrammed.
For possible inclusion, yes.
So
Your
much
Honor.
so that when the contract is finally approved in the middle of the year, for example, then meron ka ng budget authority to spend.
Yes, Your Honor.
And that's the whole concept
The
about
efficiency,
standby.
Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Everybody, I keep hearing on the news that everybody says, why don't we just file a supplemental budget? How long does a supplemental budget take?
It will go through the same process as the General Appropriations Act, Your Honor.
And in your experience, how many months will this take?
Maybe 3 to...
Your Honor, we sampled special appropriation laws. The average, I think, is 50 days. It can also, it can be longer, but the average that we got was like 50 days, and it goes through the
50.
50.
That includes already deliberations in Congress?
Yes, Your Honor.
So 2 months.
On average.
And in those 2 months na hindi ko ma-implement yung FAP because it's pending legislation, which can be extended, right? Because of everything under the sun. And in those 2 months, what happens to the contract? Do I incur any fees?
If there are delays, there could be commitment fees, Your Honor.
How much are we talking about?
I would defer to my colleague on the specific fees.
Let's have a ballpark figure. How much are we talking about?
1/4 of 1%.
1/4 of 1%.
I am listening to my previous secretaries, Your Honor.
And in projects that are huge, that 1/4 of 1% will be big.
Yes, Your Honor.
We're talking millions?
Billions, Your Honor.
Billions. Because I'm
Sometimes.
going through the legislative mill that will take me 2 months to process. In the meantime, I incur billions in terms of commitment fees.
Yes, Your Honor.
And that goes into the wisdom of UAs,
The efficiency of UA.
the efficiency of UAs. Okay. So given my understanding of 5.1 and 5.2 to be correct, can you confirm that for the 2026 GAA, the FAPs listed there under unprogrammed are only those that are referred to in 5.2?
I would have to double check the data, Your Honor.
Okay. So, yeah, let me end there. Because I noticed that 2024, 2025, and 2026, this phrase support to foreign assisted projects, they're packaged differently. 2024 has an itemization, 2025 has none, 2026 has no listing. So I want to make sure that when we say support to foreign assisted projects in the 2026 GAA, they are those that are just waiting for the loan to be approved. That they do not include FAPs that are already ready for implementation. Can you submit that?
I would not be in the position to because the GAA is the product of legislative authorization, Your Honor.
Who will be in a position to?
Maybe the Congress, Your Honor.
Counsel, are you representing Congress as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, so can you give that?
Your Honor, I was thinking ahead. Can you please say
Okay.
again your question?
Homework.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I need an itemization of the projects for 2024, 2025, and 2026 under the term support to foreign assisted projects. I need to see the name of the project, the total project cost, including the breakdown of the loan proceeds, and the GOP counterpart. And when you give me that list, tell me where in the GAA I find them so that I can look at the GAA and check. All right?
We
So I
will
want to know whether they're in the programmed or unprogrammed or whether they're both there.
We will comply, Your Honor.
Okay. And then, number 2, I want to know or a clarification on whether or not the GOP peso counterpart for any FAP in the GAAs of 2024, 2025, and 2026 was included under any line item or under any item in the unprogrammed appropriations. I want to know whether or not the GOP counterpart is being put in unprogrammed or whether it is in program. Because if it is in program, it eats up, I think, what Secretary Butch likes to call fiscal space, diba? So I'd like to know where they are.
We will comply, Your Honor.
All right. Can you also indicate which foreign assisted projects we are paying commitment fees to for this year, 2024, 2025, 2026?
We
And
will
how-
get the information.
And how much?
We will get the information, Your Honor.
Okay. That will be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Hirap ng
Thank you,
pwesto ni
Justice Ben.
Berberabe, gagi.
Justice Ramon Paul Hernando will conduct his interpellation.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Naku, bata na naman ni Duterte to, gagi.
Questions
Yari na naman.
will be brief and they will be very direct. And I'd like to ask them from the Solicitor General.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Soljen. I have some slides to share with you and everyone. There. So let's begin. I have an acronym for unprogrammed appropriations. IHUAS. For me, they stand for I hate unprogrammed appropriations. And I've already said so in my separate concurring and dissenting opinion in the Pimentel case. There. Where, among others, I bluntly said and wrote, among others, that unprogrammed appropriations in any form are unconstitutional. My opinion, Madam Soljen, is, in my reckoning, it stands on very solid constitutional grounds, and I'll show you why. The constitutional framework for the national budget is, of course, spread over several constitutional provisions. But hearing from our amicis, specifically former Budget Secretary Abad, it is an accountability framework. And taking that cue from Secretary Abad, it is a rigid budget with purpose-specific spending. Why? Article 7, Section 22 requires the President to submit to Congress within that period of 30 days a budget of expenditures and sources of financing. That is the BESF.
Is it?
And for me, and my clear, or which is based on my very clear understanding of the constitutional provisions, the BESF can only refer to program appropriations and automatic appropriations. They can never include unprogrammed appropriations. And hearing from you earlier, they can only be found in the National Expenditure Program, which is the so-called President's budget. But the Constitution does not refer to a NEP. It refers to a BESF. Now, Article 6, Section 25, subparagraph 2, complements Article 7, Section 22. It says, no provision or enactment shall be embraced in the General Appropriations Bill unless it relates specifically to some particular provision therein. Any such provision or enactment shall be limited in its operation to the appropriation to which it relates. And that is my basis for saying that the constitutional framework, insofar as our budget is concerned, is one that is rigid and with purpose-specific spending architecture. So, you are articulating for the government an interpretation of these constitutional provisions, one that is flexible. Isn't it, Madam Soljen? I have a problem
To a
with the
certain
word
extent.
flexibility or fiscal flexibility, as you said. Flexibility comes from the word flexible or flex. No? And another word for flex is bend. Are you advocating bending the Constitution?
Definitely not, Your Honor.
Why is that, Madam Soljen? Because with your argument for flexibility in that you are advancing and program appropriations to be within the framework of the government, even though it is not in the BESF, it is still to be considered as fiscal flexibility.
Your Honor, it is the submission of the respondents that the mention of budget of expenditures and sources of financing is found under the section on executive, which is a requirement for the President to submit that as a basis of the budget that will be passed by the GAA. But the Congress, being the one that has the power of the purse, it is not required that it will just adopt what the President has proposed, as has been ruled in Philconsa case by the Supreme Court as well. So
Yeah,
it is
exactly, Soljen. No? Because after all, the second phase of the budget cycle is budget legislation. That's where Congress comes in and deliberates on the proposal of the President on the basis of the BESF and the NEP, isn't it?
Yes, Your Honor.
Anyway, let me continue. So, next slide, please. The framework that I'm referring to is that the GAB would be based on a budget of expenditures and sources of financing. Relatedly, if there is need to come up with new revenues to address some future needs of the government, the Constitution also provides for Article 6, Section 25, Paragraph 4, referring to Special Appropriations Bill. Next slide, please. The constitutional mechanisms for budgetary responsiveness in such cases are the following, and you can see that in this slide. So kung kulang po ang pondo based dun sa GAA, ang aking pananaw at pananaw ng marami ay yan ay matutugunan ng supplemental budget na kaya naman palang ipasa in less than 2 months. So that's Section 25(2) of Article 6 or 7 in the form of a Special Appropriations Bill. And it would have to be coupled with funds actually available as certified by the National Treasurer or funds to be raised by a corresponding revenue proposal. Ang Constitution po natin hindi nagtatapos sa supplemental budget para matugunan ang mga ibang pangangailangan ng gobyerno sa kinabukasan. Ano po yung pangalawa? Meron yung Article 6, Section 25(5). Yan po yung power of the President, the Speaker, the Chief Justice, etc. to realign funds within their respective departments. Hindi po ba?
Yes, Your
In
Honor.
fact, that provision was the subject of the Aralio ruling. Hindi rin nagtatapos sa Article 6, Section 25, Paragraph 5. In the GAA itself, you have provisions for contingency funds. Hindi po ba?
Yes, Your Honor.
So, klarong-klaro po sa atin na ang constitutional mechanisms for budgetary responsiveness are there. We don't need UAs, Madam Soljen, because they are too risky for me.
It,
They are so risky and heavy na hindi sila makakasya sa isang maleta. They need to be encased in several maletas. So, let's go back to the budget cycle, just to be clear about it further. So, yan po yung ating budget preparation cycle, Madam Soljen. Unang-una po dyan, yung budget preparation, na-explain na ng mabuti ni Saj and Justice Ben kung anong nangyayari sa budget preparation. Pagdating sa budget legislation, sinasubmit ng Presidente yung ating sinasabing BESF kasama ang NEP, ang kanyang message to Congress at yung staffing pattern. Hindi po ba? Apat yan eh. Ngayon po, sa budget preparation, yung budget message, hindi ko na i-explain yan, just to be short. Yung budget of expenditures and sources of financing, this is a budget document that reflects the annual program of estimated expenditures and sources of financing, including receipts from existing and proposed revenue measures, which is constitutionally mandated to be submitted by the President to Congress as the basis of the GAB. Yun namang NEP ay may pagkakaiba sa BESF. Although ang sinasabi ko nga po, ang Constitution natin ay mas pinangahalagahan ang BESF at hindi ang NEP. Ang NEP naman is the budget document that contains the details of the proposed programs of the government that it submits to Congress. It serves as the basis of the General Appropriations Bill, which becomes the GAA upon enactment. So pagdating sa second phase, yung budget legislation, andyan na yung House deliberations at ang Senate deliberations pagkatapos na matapos ang deliberations sa House. Magkakaroon ngayon ng bicameral conference committee deliberations. And then there is ratification and enrollment. And finally, these are submitted to the President for enactment. The enactment of the budget or the budget legislation phase ends when the President already signs the GAA into law. And that's where he can veto items, exercising those powers as vested to him by the Constitution. So yun po yung buong cycle, Madam Soljen. Now let me just go to some specifics. And there is this table that I happened to stumble on. It came from Budget Brief number 1 of the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department of the House of Representatives. Nandyan po. Let me just validate or ask by way of questions from the DBM representative kung tama po yung table na yan. May I request your budget representative to come to the rostrum? At pakisilip po kung tama ang inyong nakikita sa monitor. If you will see, Council, taking a look at Table 1 under 2024 and 2025 columns, the total expenditure program for 2024 amounted to 5767.6. Tama po, no? Yan yung enacted budget for 2024. At yun namang 2025, ang enacted budget or appropriations, or total expenditure program ay 6326.3. Pero sa itaas po niyan ng total expenditure program and under total available appropriations ay niles yung UAs. So less under 2024, 731.4, and then under 2025, less yung 363.4. Is there a reason why hindi po isinisama yung UAs sa total expenditure program?
Your Honor, the unprogrammed appropriations are excluded because the sources of financing are different from the sources of financing for the programmed appropriations.
Because they are triggered in the future. Hindi po ba?
Yes, Your Honor.
And in that sense, the source of funding is not therefore clear at the time of the enactment of the budget.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Yes, please. Because yun naman ang pananaw ko, Madam Soljen, kung bakit itong unprogrammed appropriations, walang kinalalagyan yan sa budget dapat. Kasi nga po, hindi klaro yung sources of financing. They're not even considered expenditure at the time of enactment.
Your Honor, the sources of financing of the unprogrammed appropriations also refer to the sources of financing in the BESF, but there is a target when breached will then be the source of financing. Secondly, Your Honor, it is also our position that even in the programmed appropriations, the requirement under the Constitution is that instead of receipts, the constitutional provision says sources of financing based on existing or proposed revenues, which are also not existing at the time of enactment, Your Honor.
But you have a technical meaning for excess, hindi po ba? Kung saan manggagaling yung UAs.
Yes,
So
Your
saan po
Honor.
papasok yung excess sa sources of financing? Tama po kayo, yung panggagalingan ng excess ay identified, hindi po ba?
Tama po, Your Honor.
Pag nagka-excess, dun siya matitrigger.
Tama po, Your Honor.
Post-enactment already. Hindi po ba?
Yes,
At
Your
ang pag-release niya is also post-enactment. Hindi po ba?
Yes, Your Honor. It
And
will be the execution.
that's where congressional discretion in the argument of the Erice petition becomes discretionary. I mean, congressional discretion is surrendered to the executive department. It is now the executive department, according to the Erice petition, that is now exercising where to spend the excess funds.
Your Honor.
Hindi po ba?
Hindi po ganoon ang posisyon ng respondents sapagkat pag po pinasa ng Congress sa GAA, ito po ay mga na-identify na rin nila na purposes, na programs, in-identify na din po ang specific amounts. Ang hindi
Except
na
the
lamang
excess, kasi nga hindi nyo alam eh.
po. Opo. So,
Hindi po ba? So pag nakaroon ng excess, doon lang malalaman how much. And yung excess na yan, malaking problema po yan. Kasi at the time of enactment, hindi pa yan present. Hindi po ba? So yung discretion ng Congress to determine how much should be appropriated for a particular government activity is not there. Contrary to what the Constitution provides.
Your Honor, if I may...
Sure, Madam Sot.
If I may clarify...
I'm sorry kung medyo
I understand
emotional po
po
tayo kasi talagang matindi po ang hate ko sa UAs.
Naintindihan po natin at pare-pareho po tayong...
Ihuwas po talaga yan sa akin. I really hate unprogrammed appropriations.
So, Your Honor...
And I'm sure many of our fellow Filipinos feel the same way.
Opo.
Please,
Opo.
Soljen, I'm sorry.
Tama naman po iyon. Ang position lamang po ng government ay maigi po ngayong panahon na ito na ang composition ng Supreme Court ay maalam, matalas sa economics. Subalit, ang position po ng government ay if there are functions that are lodged in the different and co-equal branches of government, then the limits to those powers should also be defined by the Constitution. And that is what we are saying, that based on the textually demonstrable requirements for the budget, which the respondents are acknowledging that there are limits, they are not unbounded power, but it is our very respectful submission that if the judiciary will be the one to give the guardrails or what should be how the budget should be implemented, I most respectfully proffer the position of the respondents that will make the judiciary a super branch and not a co-equal branch, if I may.
We will never be that, Madam Soljen. Kaya po tayo nag-i-hearing ngayon, merong petition na hinabla ang mga petitioners. And it's our constitutional duty to hear these cases. And we have, in fact, constitutional jurisdiction over these cases on the basis of our expanded power of judicial review. Anyway, going back to my slides po, Madam Soljen. Next slide, please. So sa ngayon, ang ating GAA ay ganyan ang itsura. Merong total expenditure programs at naka-chain doon, nakatali yung unprogrammed appropriations. So there are those three triggers, Madam Soljen. Yung excess non-tax revenues, new revenue measures, at yung AFPs, approved loans for foreign assisted projects. And just to repeat, ito pong mga unprogrammed appropriations na ito, in my understanding of our constitutional framework on budget, ay walang espasyo sa General Appropriations Act. They are riders because they are not, or they do not provide for specific sources of funding. Kasi nga, sa kinabukasan pa sila makikita kung merong excess. Ang mas masama, hindi po alam kung sino ang pwedeng mag-release, whether it is the President or his secretaries in DBM, etc., etc. So yun po ang aking pananaw kung bakit ang UA, if contained in the GAA, ay rider. At yung pong inyong mga sinasabing triggers, yung tatlong yan, excess non-tax, new revenue measures, approved loans, very clear po sa ating limang amici, kahit po si Congressman Salceda nagsasabi mismo, itong mga UA na ito ay risky. Ang position nga po ni former Congressman Salceda, dagdagan ang mga guardrails. Kasi nga po, talagang nakita na yung mga risk for misuse and abuse. And I said earlier that this unconstitutional framework where you have UAs chained to the General Appropriations Act, hindi po makasya sa isang maleta eh. Several maletas. Kaya po ang dapat gawin natin dyan ay to cut off those chains with a chainsaw, hindi lang knife. Kasi hindi po kayang i-cut off ng simpleng knife yan. Napakabigat ng mga UA na yan such that it will require a chainsaw to cut off those whisks. So that's my position, Madam Soljen,
Your Honor.
with regard to UAs.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, please.
May I clarify that what amicus former Congressman Joey Salceda if my understanding is correct, is that he agrees that there should be guardrails, and that's why he included in his presentation the bills that he has authored, which are in the House and also in the Senate, because his solution is for the guardrails for the Congress to pass a law, for example, to set the deficit target, to put in a law which will set the framework, the fiscal framework, which will be observed by every administration. So I think that the point that he was making is that after every constitution, there was an accompanying budget law, which did not happen in the 1987 Constitution. There is a pending bill, and therefore, to continue to comply with the requirement that the form, content, and manner of preparation should be prescribed in a law was what Congressman Joey Salceda was advocating for.
Yeah, tama po kayo doon, Madam Soljan. Binasa ko yung napakagandang presentation ni former Congressman Salceda. Sinabi po niya doon, yung both program and unprogrammed funds palaging may risk. Pero tanggalin na po natin yung unprogrammed funds, Congressman Salceda, kasi napaka-risky niya compared po sa mga risk sa program appropriations. You remove the UAs, you remove the risk for misuse. So yan po ang aking pananaw dyan. Gusto ko lang pong tumutok sa isang foreign-assisted project. Ito yung Metro Manila Subway Project na discuss na ito ni Justice Ben. Ito pong subway project na yan, I happen to live in Mindanao Avenue. At ilang years na po kaming traffic dun sa Mindanao Avenue because yung pangunahing istasyon ng subway ay nasa magsisimula po sa malapit po sa bahay ko eh. So traffic po kami doon. Ang press release po ng gobyerno, matatapos po yung subway na ito, makakatulong sa ating mga kababayan, it will spur economic growth within NCR and for the country, is that it will be finished by 2028. Hindi po ba?
Yes,
But that's not going to happen anymore, Madam Soljan, because of what happened in the budgeting process with regard to the funds for the subway project. Ang panibagong timeline po ngayon sa subway project na yan, ang setback ay 5 years. Kung ako po ay tama ang aking recollection sa mga nababasa ko at nakikita sa TV. So setback. Ibig sabihin po yan, yung 5 taon na yan, magbabayad tayo ng mga commitment fee. Mga interest payments. Panibagong alam niyo na po kung anong ibig sabihin, Madam Solicitor General. And there goes the table regarding the budget for that subway. Makikita po ninyo dyan sa table na yan, noong 2019, meron ng program funds yan na 13 billion. The following year, 38.6. 2021, 21.1. 2022, 3 billion. 2023, 25 billion. Biglang nawala po noong 2024. Pati po yung loan proceeds nawala. Noong 2024, nawala din yung local counterpart noong 2024. Kaya po under the year 2024, NA, andun. Ngayon po, mapapansin ninyo, noong 2023, merong total program funds na 25.1 para sa project na yan. Pero dun sa loan proceeds na galing sa lender, biglang nawala. yung local counterpart, meron pa rin, 25.1. Gusto ko lang pong malaman, bakit po kaya nawala yung loan proceeds noong 2023? Pero merong local counterpart. Does this mean that the lender stopped the release of the loan proceeds?
Your Honor, I do not have the answer. It is our position that it goes to the policy question. We might hate the decisions, or we might make a determination that it is an unsound decision and it isn't good for the public, but we did not get any information and we did not ask why and how they put the items in the appropriation when they did.
I think that's fair enough. By way of an answer, Madam Solgen, we would not know, no? Pero kung ikaw ay nagpapautang at bigla mong tinigil yung pagpapautang mo, may problema yung nangungutang para sa akin. Ngayon po, noong 2024, nawala din yung total program, yung loan proceeds at yung local counterpart. At nagsimula lang pong umusad ulit noong 2025 at 2026. Lahat po ito ay nasa unprogrammed funds, FAP Hindi po ba?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ngayon po, itong subway project na ito ay flagship project ng gobyerno. Matagal na po nating inaasam itong subway na ito. In fact, in my research, itong blueprint for the subway project was or came up during the time of former President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in the late 70s. Ganun po katagal yung subway project na yan. At nabuhay lang po ulit nung panahon ni former President Rodrigo Duterte. Pero nasaan program funds po siya? Ang iniisip ko po, kung ito ay flagship project at talagang makakatulong sa ating mga kababayan, bakit po nasa unprogrammed funding or unprogrammed funds where there is risk of corruption that the funds will be misused at yung iba pang factors na negative that comes with unprogrammed appropriations, Madam Solgen. Bakit hindi na lang po siya sa program funds? That way, program yung local counterpart funding, program yung lender's part of the obligation or the proceeds, I mean, at tuloy-tuloy yung project. Hindi po ba?
Yes, Your Honor. It is the position of the respondents that it goes again to a policy question
Policy
of the
question,
Congress.
yes.
May I elaborate,
Yes.
Your Honor? Thank you. And maybe perhaps it is also important to understand the rationale behind the separation of powers. The Constitution is patterned after the U.S. Constitution, which really wanted a proper check and balance to the executive. For example, in the U.S. experience, when the president wanted to support the Vietnam War, all the Congress had to do was to withhold the funding so that the troops can go home. So that means that, because you are correct in your observations, in your comments, that why is it that there are movements from the program to unprogrammed if they are priorities? But we could also ask the question, why is it that the Constitution gave the power of the purse to the Congress, who are more in touch with the particular interests and have a local view, rather than, why not to the executive, which has the expertise of the DBM and all the studies? So why is it that it is lodged in Congress? And if I may proffer, Your Honor, it is a very important check and balance that is being designed by the Constitution for the Congress to be a check to an executive who might also be abusing its own power. So they are checking each other.
Precisely, Madam Soljen. Alam po ninyo, nabanggit niyo ang United States of America, after whom our Constitution was patterned. Sa aking intindi sa budget process sa Amerika, wala yata silang unprogrammed appropriations. Kaya nga po nakakaroon sila ng government lockdown eh. At itong si Donald Trump, nangangailangan ng pondo para ituloy pa ang kanyang military campaign sa Middle East, humihingi ng panibagong pondo sa Kongreso. That's how they do it in the United States. Kung makikita nga po ni Donald Trump itong UAs natin, he will turn into somebody like Jerry Maguire. Alam niyo po kung bakit? Alam niyo po si Jerry Maguire? An early 90s movie by
Yes po.
where
Naalala.
Tom Cruise
Opo.
and Renee Zellweger,
You Had Me at Hello
appeared,
po.
no? Napanood po ninyo yun, Madam Soljen.
Yes
Very
po.
lovely and romantic movie. Nung makita po ni Tom Cruise si Renee Zellweger, yung asawa niya na gustong kumalas sa kanya, sabi ni Tom Cruise kay Renee, "You complete me." Kung ito pong UA makita ni Donald Trump, maniwala kayo sa akin, sasabihin niya sa UA, you complete me because I can continue with my wars in the Middle East without congressional approval and oversight. Yan po ang isang risk ng unprogrammed appropriations if it is in the context of the United States of America Constitution. Pero ang pinag-uusapan po natin ay Constitution ng Pilipinas. At sa aking paniwala, sa aking matinding research sa constitutional framework regarding our budget, wala pong espasyo ang unprogrammed appropriations sa ating national budget. Maraming salamat po, Madam Solicitor General. Chief, I'm finished. Good afternoon to everybody.
Thank you po, Your Honor.
Thank you, Justice Mon Hernando. So as not to distract the flow of the interpellation, we will suspend the session and continue on June 2, 9, and 16, all at 9:30 in the morning. Attorney Cuevas, any other matters?
There are no other matters, Your Honor.
Session is adjourned.
Okay, so good day my fellow taong bayan, mga ka-Seymour. At ngayon po, pag-usapan natin yung tungkol sa unprogrammed funds kasi po nagkaroon ng Supreme Court oral arguments dun sa cases po involving the 2024, 2025, and 2026 unprogrammed funds sa General Appropriations Act for those years.